Well, ladies and gentlemen, I can promise you I will not stand in front of you for another 2 hours. I guarantee you that. And I'm really not going to take a lot of time. I just want to highlight a couple of things. One, Mr. Johnson's initial, first part of his closing argument about this whole drug angle, that some unknown heroin dealer came out of nowhere after the Follets followed this van and Jessica turned the light back on. You remember Lieutenant Casher, he just testified this morning, and they looked at that drug angle. They worked it. They beat it to death practically. It came up with nothing. There was in his mind, and he testified, there is no drug angle here. They talked to the people that actually would deal Miss Heeringa heroin. They talked to those folks, and it just wasn't there. So to suggest for a second that that's what happened to Miss Heeringa, you know from the testimony that it didn't happen that way. The other thing too is, and again, the judge is going to tell you this, and I think Mr. Johnson said this. You know, what we tell you is not evidence; it's what you saw and heard in this case. And I certainly will disagree with Mr. Johnson's assessment. Every single witness, every single piece of testimony, every single exhibit, all 201 of them, is a piece of evidence that you can use in holding me to my standard of proof. Not just some of them, but every single one of them. And in cases such as this, you know, people always ask me, you know, gosh, what do you, circumstantial case, what do you think about that? And I always embrace those cases. Why? Because it's like, if you ever had kids or you yourself, you bought those Lego sets, and when you open up those Lego sets, it's all a bunch of colored bricks and all of these other pieces, and ultimately as you go through the instructions and you put the bricks together, it starts taking shape and taking form, and eventually at the end it turns into the shape that looks like it's on the box. And that's what a circumstantial case is. Each piece of evidence in this case was a brick. And as the witnesses were presented to you and as they testified and as we've talked about in closing argument, it was putting those bricks together. And ultimately, that Lego shape took the shape of the defendant's guilt. You know, what I found interesting is that throughout Mr. Johnson's closing, he touched on a few things about the prosecution's case, but not every single one of them. Really didn't go after Larry Brooks and his analysis of the Boyer coin video or the analysis of investigators of the video leading up to the Boyer coin video. He didn't attack that. Quite honestly, you guys are the arbiters of the facts. In other words, you decide what you remember you heard and what you didn't hear. Not what we said. If, for example, Ms. Follett didn't say that she saw anybody behind in the back of the van. In fact, she said she saw movement, but she didn't see anybody, if you remember, until the individual, the male, broke the corner of the back and the side where the light was. That's the first time she saw that individual, not behind the van. She saw movement, but she didn't see anybody. So I just want you to be careful about some of the presentation. Again, there are certain aspects that I could go over, and I just don't. I'm not going to harp on it. I will say this: is that when we look at things that are tied to Jessica Heeringa, you cannot. Although Mr. Johnson did a good job of trying to fluff it, you cannot overlook certain things. This gun. Again, I go back to this idea that if the defendant legitimately got this gun, legitimately, why is he lying about it? Why is he telling investigators when they ask him, hey, look, do you have any other guns besides that registered Versa that is in your house? And he says, no. Oh, I don't have any guns. No. But today, defense wants you to believe that he got it legitimately. That's the story you need to go with. That's the real story. That this Notella was afraid that hell was going to come down on her. Well, let's think about that for a second. This case, these investigations have been going on since May of 2016. This Notella has been involved with law enforcement from May of 2016 till May of 2018. Do you really think she was worried about getting in trouble if she sold the gun to the defendant? No. Not a chance. Not a chance. Not a chance. You can't brush over the VIX file, folks. This explanation that he's fascinated and is a collector because of his, certainly he's a collector. There's no question about that. But there have been several high-profile abduction and murder cases in this nation, yet he doesn't have any of those anywhere in his computer files. This idea that it's just because he's fascinated by it and he's interested in it is, quite frankly, just not true. And really the last thing that I want to touch on, ladies and gentlemen, is this idea that I think one of the biggest things that Mr. Johnson stayed far away from, that's displayed for you on the screen right now, is this password change. This password change and the date that's associated with it. I think it cannot go unnoticed that 4/27/13 is significant in the defendant's mind, tied to the initials JLH for Jessica Lynn Heeringa. And the only conclusion that we can draw from that is that that's when she died. That's when the defendant killed her. And it seems to coincide, again, with the phone records we have, if you think about it. Because she's taken in the late evening hours of the 26th, and his phone is still pinging by the phone calls coming from or going to his house on 4/27. So, folks, again, you have paid very close attention to everything in this case. And the court will tell you when the court instructs you that, again, every piece of evidence is relevant. Every piece of evidence is at your disposal to decide this case, whether it is another act that he's not on trial for or the one that he is on trial for. Every single piece. So my request to you is that you use it. Use it all. Because that's what it's there for. That's why the court allowed you, the trier of fact, to hear it. So, folks, as you go back, obviously, listen to the instructions, read the instructions, but in the end, I'm convinced that the evidence will convince you that we've put together that Lego, that building, all those building blocks have been put together so that you can find the defendant guilty of not only first-degree felony and premeditated murder, but also of kidnapping Jessica Lynn Heeringa, because that's exactly what he did. Thank you.